Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. On this episode, I'm speaking to a best-selling author who's written an extraordinary book about her vision for the future. Now, unusually for this series, the book is a piece of fiction, but the issues it deals with are very relevant to human risk. My guest is Manda Scott, who began her career as a veterinary surgeon and is now an award-winning writer and podcaster. Manda's new book, Any Human Power, has the subtext, Dream Deeply, Rise Up Strong, Change is Coming, and is centered around a protagonist called Lan, a woman on her deathbed who makes a promise to her grandson Finn. Realizing he is struggling with the idea of living in a world without her, she vows to be there for him even after her death. And as she passes away, she steps into a shamanic realm known as the Void, where she learns to navigate and influence the timelines of the future. Lan's journey is marked by her attempts to keep her promise to Finn, acting from beyond the grave to guide and protect him. The narrative explores the complex interplay between life and death, human connection, and the power of shamanic practices. Lan discovers she can impact the physical world through the digital realm, using online gaming to connect with Finn and help him in his moments of need. Now, this might be a piece of fiction, but it's written as a call to action, to inspire us all to envision and work towards a future where human values align with the well-being of the planet and all its inhabitants. And if that sounds radical, it is. But as you'll hear, Manda has some really interesting ideas about how we can achieve that. In our discussion, we explore Manda's career, the transformative power of storytelling, and her basis of the vision for the future. We'll dive into the inspiration behind Any Human Power, explore ideas like regenerative economics, and how the surprising role of technology in online gaming can foster human connection and societal progress. This is a slightly unusual topic for the show, but it was a fascinating conversation, and I think you're going to find this really interesting. So please enjoy my discussion with Manda Scott on human power. Manda, welcome to the Human Risk Podcast.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. It's such an inspiring podcast, so I'm very glad to be invited.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you here because not only have you written a fabulous book, which we'll come on to talk about, but I think you're a super interesting person with some really interesting ideas. Rather than me mangling a description of you, can you just tell my listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yep. So I grew up in Scotland, which does colour everything that I do. And I started off life as a veterinary surgeon. Actually, I started off life specialising in anaesthesia and intensive care, and then I narrowed it down to intensive care of neonatal horses, so foals, newly born, because I was in Newmarket. And if Sheikh X has paid £250,000 stud fee for his foal, he will pay whatever it takes to keep it alive. And then I went back into academia, and about 10 years after qualifying, I looked down the line and thought, I don't really want to get to where this takes me. And so, keeping it very short, I ended up as a novelist, and now I'm also a podcaster. And in the middle, I went off and did a master's in regenerative economics at Schumacher, which was completely life-changing, and is the reason that I'm no longer writing historical novels. I used to think if we could see who we had been, we would change who we were. And up to a point, that works for some people, but it doesn't work at scale. And so the podcast and the most recent book are designed to address the issue of scale and the need for total systemic change. In between, I am a regenerative smallholder, endeavouring to be, and I teach something that we call shamanic dreaming, which will mean nothing to anyone who doesn't do it. So it's essentially contemporary shamanic practice. That's about it.
There's so much to unpick there. And I want to make sure that we don't forget this. This is highly likely to happen given the way my brain works. Tell us about the podcast, because I just want to make sure that we've captured that front, because it's a fascinating listen. What's the thinking behind that?
It's called Accidental Gods. It arose out of the same set of, everything I do arises out of my shamanic dreaming, but I don't want to freak your listeners out. But it arose out of the same set of visions that created something which is called the Accidental Gods membership program. And the aim of both is predicated on my belief that we need total systemic change, that generally is going to hinge on an evolution of human consciousness. We have to change our value set, essentially. It doesn't really matter what we tweak in terms of economics or politics or production consumption if we still see ourselves as separate from the rest of the living web of life, and if we are still trying to heal the wounds inside by garnering stuff and throwing it away because it doesn't work. But then I can buy something else and throw it away and it still won't work. But we're caught in that cycle. So the explicit aim of the podcast is to give voice to people who are right at the leading edge of change. You know the old quote of, the future is already here, it's just very unevenly distributed. And it's true. We have all the answers. We're just not mainstreaming them fast enough. That's a horrible Americanization of taking a noun and turning it into a verb. But we're not. We are not yet at the tipping point where the things that we need to do are the obvious things for everyone to do. So the podcast is there to let people know that there are people who consider themselves to be ordinary human beings out there in the world doing the things that will take us to where we could be if we were going to bequeath a future that was worth having to the generations that come after us. That's my absolute bottom line is I want, when I die, to look along the timelines. I have no kids, but to the future generations, both human and more than human, and have them look back at us and go, yeah, we are proud of that generation. They did it. They did make a lot of mistakes and they did leave it way too late. But when they finally got to it, they laid the foundation for the life that we have, and that life is worth living.
And so if I look at what this touches, you're obviously looking at concerns for the environment. This is social inequality, justice, political systems that don't work for everybody. All of these things are part of this vision of
Yes.
I guess to sort of summarize it in terms I might use is sustainability. Would that be a way to look at this? I mean, it's more than just that term, obviously, but is that a good way to
It
look at
probably
this?
is. I exist in an information bubble where sustainability is doing slightly less harm. And the word we're more edging to is regeneration, which is creating a world that is thriving. However, regeneration has also recently been co-opted by the death cult of predatory capitalism, so we're going to have to find another word. But sustainability, I think, probably covers it for most people as long as it's actual sustainability and not greenwash sustainability.
Right. What I find fascinating about the way you talk about it is that I mean, this is one hell of an ask.
But we have to do it.
But we have to do it, right? So you're really looking at it and saying, I don't care how challenging this is. We need to think differently. And the time, and I guess the time, implicit in what you're saying is the time to think differently was yesterday
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
years before, but better late than never.
But we're here now, so let's do it now. Yes, absolutely. And the title of the podcast is Accidental Gods, and that's, the clue is in the name. We did not, you and I'm sure, we look probably roughly the same age. We did not grow up thinking that we were going to be part of the generation that was facing species level extinction. And here we are. And so what can we do? What is the best that each of us can bring to the table to change things? And I genuinely believe there is still a possibility. My metaphor is we're all in a bus that is barreling towards the edge of a cliff. And the old straight white guys have got their hands clamped on the wheel and they are not going to take them off without serious pressure. But we're back in the bus arguing about what color to paint the blinds, which is not going to help. So we need all to get together, recognize we're all in a bus. None of us wants to go over the edge of the cliff, not even the people with their hands clamped on the wheel. And if we all get together, there is still time to turn away from the edge of the cliff and turn to something that is worth having. I think that's really important because it's not hard to imagine dystopic futures. And I get really cross now with my fellow writers who are writing dystopias because they're not useful in any way. And the argument of if we show people how bad it's going to be, they'll all change has demonstrably not worked.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's obvious, right?
It
It's
just
why
doesn't.
would I sign up to something that sounds horrific when I can
Exactly.
kind of pretend to keep going with something that
Exactly.
feels better? Yeah.
Yeah. But if people like me and you and us, we can offer a future that you look at and go, God, actually, that might be quite hard work, but that would be worth leaving to my kids. That would be grand. Let me do that. And here are the ways it can happen. Then we get the movement that we need.
And so all of this is, I guess, the force behind your writing, if I can put it that way, which is you're telling stories, but your ultimate objective is to communicate this message through those stories.
Totally. Yes, thank you. Brilliant. Can you come and do my PR for me? I'm really bad at saying it so succinctly.
I think you've got a great person doing your PR to give that credit.
Yes, that's true. Yes, no, Tabitha is fantastic. I meant, can you go and stand on platforms for me? Because I'm really bad. I tend to get lost in the weeds, but that's exactly it. Yes.
And that's why I think it's important when before we explore the book to understand where you're coming from in simple terms, because this is storytelling. I mean, all storytelling has a point, but you really are
that's the
trying
thing.
to get your message across that this matters. And so the story. So we're in the territories of, and I don't wish to compare this thing because I think it's not a fair way to describe it, but we're sort of in the in the territory. It's not parables, but it's that sort of storytelling that's designed to get people
Mm.
to think and to get people to
Yeah,
change their behavior.
it is. Yes, it absolutely, unashamedly, totally is. And up to a point, everything I've ever written has been that. And there are people who even now read the Boudica books and they just read a historical novel. And that's fine. And then there are people who read it and it opens up different worlds for them. So you it's not intended to be nobody wants to be preached at. Nobody wants to feel that they're being manipulated while basically they're just, we read books to relax. So yes, absolutely that was every single word is infused with that concept. But it's also designed if you don't want to see that, you can just read it as a thriller. And that's fine too.
And tell us a little bit about the process that you went through to be inspired to write this, because I read your blog on this, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But it's what I thought was fascinating is you're not just putting the book out there. You do. I mean, it's not forced on you in the book, but there's a section at the end where you explain this. You've blogged about this, and so I love the fact that you're showing, sort of to use the maths analogy, you're showing us your
Showing the working.
workings as well.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit how the book was inspired, because I love that story. It's very, very authentically you from what I've read and seen now. But I think it's a
Thank
great
you.
sort of intro into how a writer is inspired.
Thank you. Okay, I will try and keep this succinct. I teach, as we said, the contemporary shamanic work, and we were in the middle of lockdown, which meant we suddenly discovered that we could teach on Zoom. Things that I genuinely believed you had to be in the room together turned out not to be the case, which was very interesting. And I had the one that I'd said, I'm not doing this online, it's too dangerous. Just sorry, guys, we had actually for this one, you really do have to be in the room. And in the end, I had students in Germany and Ireland and Switzerland and all over going, we would have to have 2 weeks quarantine either side of coming to spend time with you in Wales. Please, please do whatever you can. Just do it online because we're on a circuit and you can't progress until you have to take it all in order. And they were just in a holding pattern for years. So we did it online, which was a very interesting experience. Not planning to repeat it. And on the Saturday night is the big difficult bit where I think I have to have total focus on the moment. Ha. And in the end, I didn't. I was having visions, which sometimes happens, not often, but sometimes. And most of the time when shamanic stuff comes in, it's in metaphoric felt sense nudges, and it can take years, literally, to work out whatever the heck is going on. The last time it was a real clear, you need to do this now, was going to Schumacher to study economics. Are you kidding me? But anyway, that was so completely not on my radar until that point. But this one was take the 30,000-year-old fossilized horse's tooth that holds a particular part of the gate that you're working with on the altar today, find some ethically sourced horse skin, that took me a month, bind the tooth onto, there's a very, very old late hedge on the hill on the farm that I live on. It's centuries old, so it's very thick, but it's horizontal. Bind it on there and then sit with your back to this tooth in a particular frame of mind for at least an hour as the sun goes down every night. So, okay. Well, if something comes in that clear text, my understanding now is you don't stop and you don't ask, but why? Which might be obvious. You just go, okay, I'm doing that. I will do it. And it's August, and that's lovely. And sitting watching the crows go to bed, which is what I did every night, it was lovely. And I'm thinking it's not going to be quite so much fun by February, but okay, you do what you're told. And by the end of the week, I had the core of this book and an absolute explicit instruction to write it. And the relevance of that is I genuinely thought I'd stopped writing. Not that I didn't love it. I did love it, but it takes a long time to write a book and get it out into the world. And I was recording, but you could record this, you could put it out tomorrow if you wanted. It's of the moment, it's in the moment, and it reaches a lot of people. And if I put all the energy I put into writing into really spreading the podcast, it probably would reach a lot more people. And yet the instruction was, no, I'm sorry, you have to write the book. So, okay. I want help with this, guys, because this is not going to be easy. Because that was the other realization was this is harder than anything I have ever done. Writing history requires getting your head around certain historical concepts, but basically we're writing within our culture, and there are fundamentals to the way that we currently think within what Francis Weller calls our trauma culture that haven't changed that much in the last 2,000 years. Stepping forward in a way that takes us from where we are with our thoughts now to something that feels authentic and we can see the root and it would be different, that's a lot harder. So did that sound reasonably
Yeah, well,
succinct to you?
absolutely. And the fascinating thing for me is this idea that obviously to produce something as creative as you've produced a book, you need some form of inspiration. And so I love this idea that for you, that involves doing something very dedicated, something that for lots of people would seem very unusual. And you're going to sit out there and you're
Totally.
going to just see what happens. But it feels very at one with the creative process that we know happen, because creativity isn't something that we can just summon from out of nowhere. Sort of,
No,
we can't
exactly.
mandate creativity. It comes, we have to create an environment where that flourishes. And for you, the message that you got to go and do that. I mean, for me, I would sit there and think, oh, I couldn't do that. That doesn't. But I'm not you, and you're not me, and I think that's a wonderful illustration. So you sat there, and there's a bit that you talked about I think it was in your blog, where you sort of said, oh, you were determined to see through the mission of sitting there, but actually you were told it was more important that you went to write the book, and therefore you
Yeah,
were to
yeah.
give up
Yeah.
on that objective.
Well, I didn't have to. The absolute thing was you can sit out if you want to, but you don't need to. What you need to do now is write the book. And I was loving it, actually. I was actually loving sitting there just peacefully feeling that connection to the web of life, actually watching the crows go to bed, which is, referenced in the early pages of the book, and holding in that particular mindset. It wasn't something that I was familiar with, and it was gorgeous. It is much less fun in February, but I do still do it. I don't do it every night, but I do still do it periodically because it was really, really nice. But my question was, do I need to keep going up the hill? And the answer was no. You just need to get your act together and write the book now, please, straight away. So it took a year, obviously, and then another year to edit. But yeah, that's the nature of writing.
And were you? I mean, what you do in the book is talk about the future, and we see it through the eyes of a main protagonist. And I'll get you to talk a little bit about that construct. But was the plot clear to you up front, or is it coming to
Yeah,
you as you're writing?
yeah, it was coming as out. So the bit that was clear was the main protagonist, and I think this is not a particular spoiler. It's pretty much obvious. Is she's on her deathbed in a hospital. Her grandson is sitting at her side, and he says at some point in their conversation, when you come home, can we do X? And she goes, no, I'm not coming home. I'm dying. You do know this. This is it. And in the course of the ensuing conversation, he says, you're the only one who gets me. I don't want to live in a world with you not in it. And she realizes he's serious. And she makes a promise that if he really needs her and if he calls, she will do her best to come. And they're both fairly switched on to what I would call the worlds of shamanic realities. And they kind of feel the gods pause on their labors and go, okay, that's a real promise. And then she dies. And then the rest of the book is her arc of the book is having to keep that promise, even when she isn't necessarily welcome. And which happens quite a lot later. And then the other thing that I saw sitting on the hill was she steps into a place. It's a shamanic concept, which is the void, which is outside space and time. And she's taught how to split the timelines of the future, which again is another shamanic concept. And in the beginning, she's taught you never see when you do this. You can see alternative timelines, but you don't see the ones over which you have agency, and that is a thing. And so she sees in the first instance the many ways that Finn succeeds in killing himself. And then she's said, okay, told by her guide, which is a crow. I had been watching the crows go to bed. Crows are active in my life. That now she has to find a way to act, and she's dead. How do the dead find ways to act in the lands of the living? So that's her first challenge. And then later in the book, she goes into the void twice more. And this was the crucial bit that I saw, was that she sees all the ways humanity could crash and burn. And the implication then, she's got less help, she has to figure it out for herself, is that there are still ways where she can have influence over the people she cares about, and then the wider global movement that they have drawn together to turn the bus away from the cliff's edge. That was all I got. That was it. So come down from the hill, and now you write that, and you make it work.
Wow. So it's interesting because this is sort of if I think about the sort of J.K. Rowling Harry Potter, that's all plotted out in advance. So we know how
Yeah.
I'm going to get the number wrong, but the seventh book
7.
ends, right?
Yeah.
She's got
Yeah.
all that
She
worked
knew
out.
that from the beginning.
You've
Yes.
just literally got the start point of a concept, and you're going to, I guess, like the bird analogy probably works quite well. Just fly off and see what happens with that, and take it.
That's a brilliant analogy. Yes, exactly. And within writing circles, in the days when I used to write historical or crime novels, you'd sit on a panel and we would have that discussion. There are the plotters, and I hate the phrase, but they call them pantsers, as in seats of the pants. And I think, no, it's the dreamers. There's
Right.
the people who need to think they can't write a book until they've worked all the plot out first. But what they're doing basically is working it all out in their head and then writing it. And I am not patient enough to do that. Also, I really need to get to know the characters. So the way I've always written is an evolution of, here's a person, here's the question that motivates them now. So here's Lan. How are you actually going to navigate the between place between the lands of life, the lands of death, such that you can keep your promise? And that's the question that we start with. And that's the question that I start with. And then people turn up and everybody comes in, and some of them are really surprising. They're characters that turn up that I think are just there to balance the end of a sentence, and then they turn out to be crucial. And learning to flex with that, to flow with whatever comes, but then also in the end finding a good editor that you trust who goes, no, that entire thread that just needs to go. We don't need to see that. So that's also part of the process. That this is the nature of writing, I think.
And one of the themes that spoke to my younger self but doesn't speak to me now is the idea of online gaming. And
Yes.
and I thought it was fascinating to have an older character who, while she's still alive, is actively playing games with her. and
Grandson.
and clearly that seemed to me that must be based on some experience she'd had, because it's sort of an interesting construct that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, and at the time, I was gaming a lot. I've given up again because I had a book to edit, and I've given up World of Warcraft 5 times in the last 20 years. So I'm assuming that this is not a permanent giving up, because it never is. So it was quite a big part of my life, and I needed a way for a 62-year-old woman and her 15-year-old grandson to bond such that when he said, "You're the only one who gets me," it was credible. And he living with Lan and her partner Kate at the time for reasons that are explained in the book. So it's not impossible, and Kate's already died. So Lan was his anchor. But I just also, when I was doing a lot of the research for this, there's a lot of writing done of people's experiences, either with near death experiences or a friend or a family member dies and they feel an impact of that in the time immediately after their death. And one of them was a really interesting one of a guy who was a neurosurgeon. He was quite switched on and not given to flights of fancy. And a very close friend had drowned trying to rescue his son in the ocean, other side of the planet. And these two men, so the one who's alive and the one who had recently died, had played, it must have been a very early computer game together. And when you scored, you got a little whoopee noise. And he said he was in absolute trauma and grief, and he just sat down, and his way to connect with his friend was to play this game. And all that night, all he got was whoopee, whoopee. He said it was instrumentally impossible that happened within the way that the game was laid out. And he felt that it was his friend saying, "It's okay, I'm all right," and connecting. And so that I had that there as a model to then allow Lan, who's quite a long way along the spectrum, to go into the machine. And she can't pick up a pen, she can't write, she can't hug Finn, she can't connect in the physical world, but she can spin the electrons within the flow within the game, and she can connect with him this one time within the game. And I just did that because I had the model. It was there, really.
And I thought it was fascinating because we often think about technology. I mean, there's obviously the benefits of video calling and the positive. Let's take the positive side of social media to the extent that there is one of that connecting
Yep.
people. But obviously, we don't naturally think of tech. And in fact, we think of gaming, if you're outside that space, as being a very solitary activity. It's almost the
Yeah.
derogatory thing of the kids sitting in the basement. When are they
Yeah.
going to grow up? Type logic. And
Exactly.
you've used it as a vehicle to talk about human communication, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. And because I think it is, because my experience is that when I was really into this and in a a guild and a community, and we were in the battlegrounds 2 or 3 times a week, there is a real sense of solidarity. There are people that I have never met and will never meet who I would count as really close friends. And I used to do battle reenactment in my youth, which is much the same, except it involves a lot more mud and, generally speaking, more alcohol. And the same, if you're in a line, a battle line, you know the people that you can trust to keep you, in inverted commas, alive. And it's a very limbic thing. It may be that my cerebral cortex knows that the guy coming at me with an axe is actually a chartered accountant who, is going to sit
They're the
around the
worst
fire
ones,
singing.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. They're a complete maniac. Singing the philosopher's song at 4 o'clock the following morning, and I will want to kill him. And he's actually not actually trying to kill me. But all of my limbic system is 100% convinced that if I don't kill him first, he's going to kill me. And in that strange touching the edges of my self space, I know who I can trust. And it's exactly the same in the battlegrounds. I was a battleground healer, but I would know the tanks that you develop really good communication that goes way, way, way beyond the verbal. And it's highly complex. It involves, it is multidimensional chess on the run. If you've got 10 people each side, each with different qualities in a battleground, I'm sure there isn't an actual infinite number of variabilities, but it must be pretty close. So it's involving a lot of high-level cognitive capacity and an energetic capacity, and it creates really strong bonds. So when you're up against an establishment that is not going to give up easily, and Finn needs to know who he can trust, it's the people he's been in the battleground with. He absolutely knows he can trust these people.
And that sense of camaraderie that's there that really drives, a lot of the positive actions in book. I think again, it really surprised me that had been built online because, as you say, if I look at it, yes, and on back to your point around Zoom, an online connection, a connection is better than no connection. But it really did come through to me that sense of community. And it's not something I had ever I've ever engaged with. So I don't really have that sense of it, but it came through very, very strongly that actually those bonds are incredibly powerful. And what you're pointing towards is, ironically, is the technology is delivering the benefits of a simpler society, exactly the sort of things you're talking about. And so what I thought was ironic was it's the thing that brings us progress, potentially to dangerous ways. There's also a gateway to getting out of it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for noticing that. Yes. And I think I took very much as a model here Audrey Tang's work in Taiwan. Are you familiar with that
No,
at
tell
all?
us a bit about that.
Okay, so Audrey Tang is the youngest digital minister on the planet. And in 2014, there was something called the Sunflower Movement, Sunflower Revolution in Taiwan. Something to do with their relationship with China, which I completely don't get. But the main parliament was refusing to debate a particular trade deal, I think, with China that was going to have impact on the whole of Taiwan. And the students went in, I think when nobody else was there, took over, and with the support of the Speaker of the Parliament, held the debate. And Audrey Tang was the one who went in with Ethernet cables and made sure that the entirety of the country could see this happening. And as a result, the Parliament's behaviour changed. And they did what they were called forking the government. So they had, let's assume that Taiwan's government is Taiwan.gov. They created what they called Gov0, which is Taiwan G0V. And they continued everything that the government did, they mirrored, but they made the decisions based on different criteria, different value systems. And then Audrey Tang was invited to become digital minister. And as a result, the way that Taiwan functions digitally, they have social media where it's not mining our basest insect, the race to the bottom of the brainstem, to increase the profits of the vulture capitalists, which is essentially what our social media is. Create the maximum division because that way you keep people online screaming at each other and that way you can sell them stuff. What they do in Taiwan is that the algorithm sorts for bridge building, consensus across divides rather than splitting the divides and pushing them to polarities. And that then feeds into governance. So they use AI algorithms to work out demographics of belief systems. So, in the old days, we used to go onto Facebook and we'd fill in one of these quadrants, and it was Cambridge Analytica mining our data so they could then send us the stuff to make us vote the way they wanted. What they do in Taiwan is they might have similar questionnaires, but then that goes, okay, so let's bring 10 of you together and you all have very disparate views. We know you have disparate views because we followed your social media with your permission. And now we're going to bring you together. You might never have met each other, but we're going to give you software that looks at the language you're sharing together and helps you to build bridges. And you will get little social media sparkles for building bridges. So there's a kind of a gamification of it. But as the end result, you'll understand each other better. And then we're going to ask you what you think about certain policy decisions. And that way, we will have pretty much anyone who's sentient in Taiwan feeding into our policies. It's distributed democracy and it's working. And they used it to fend off. They had general elections in January of this year. They used it to fend off assault by the Chinese, a digital assault that was, all of the AI fakes that we are going to see in our election, what Audrey Tang called pre-bunking. So they showed videos of this is how you make these fake videos. And this is what I, Audrey Tang, will look like in a fake video. And this is what I might be saying. And this is how you verify whether this video is real or fake. And here we've set up structures. I just wrote an article of this for the New European, so I could go on for hours, but I won't. But they set up really interesting structures of here's verification. If in doubt, consider it's fake. And then feed into social media going, hey guys, I think this is fake. And the AI is set to look at the language structures of what you're feeding in to your social media, sort out the ones that the majority go, yeah, that's definitely a fake. What sort of language is it using? And then we can then begin to go, this kind of thing might well be fake. And they had China trying to subvert their elections, and China failed. We had Russia trying to subvert various democratic processes in the UK, and they succeeded very well. So for me, it's a real example of how the technology that we have, which is extraordinary and the product of human creativity, if we change the value system, can be enormously useful. And the other thing, I'll stop in a minute, but I listened to
It's fascinating.
a guy called, I think it was either Jamie Whale or Jordan Greenhall, I can't remember, but it was a podcast that I listened to while I was still at Schumacher, so 16, 17, maybe a bit later. And he was an entrepreneur. It must have been Greenhall. And he said to his 12-year-old daughter, at the start of the summer holidays, vacation, because they're in the States, I will give you X amount of money, which is a lot to her, if you can create something on Minecraft, which was her game, something that nobody's ever seen before. And she went, can I invite some friends? And he went, yeah, sure. So that evening, she gets together with 7 other people that she has never met, but she plays Minecraft with all around the world, and gives them this option. They go, okay, cool. And then they play Minecraft all summer. And it's getting to 3 or 4 days for the deadline of them going back to school. And Dad says, did you want these dollars? Were you going to do it? And she went, oh yeah, sure, yeah. And tags her friends again. And within, I think it was 3 days, these 7 people had allocated, 7 young people, 12, 13, had allocated roles within their group. One of them's writing the manual, one of them's writing the structure, one of them's building the architecture, one of them's actually doing the build. And he said not only had they built something he'd never seen before, they'd built something he could not have imagined happening. And he said he doesn't even want to name what it is they were doing, because the energetics of it was also something he could never have imagined happening, and he could not have set it up, and he couldn't have defined how to do it. And the generation that has grown up with broadband is doing this. And it's not all bad, and it is at a distance, and you can create extraordinary bonds and build really amazing things. And I wanted that to be an awareness that arises to people who, grew up before the internet existed, to understand that this is a possibility.
And the thing I thought was fascinating was when if somebody listened to you start talking, there is a prejudice, and I'll use that term rather than say presumption. There's a prejudice that you might be a Luddite. That what you're talking about. Let's go back to the way things used to be.
No, I'm
and,
not.
and
Absolutely
actually,
not.
And the thing that really comes across strongly in the way you just talk now, and the way is that actually you see the positives of technology. So this is about saying we can use all of these tools. At the moment, we're using them for appalling things. I mean, there are some good use cases, but
Exactly.
there are some terrible use cases as well, and
Yes.
lots of nefarious things happening. And so there's a positive uplifting thing that says we've got the tools to be able to do this. And so as those tools develop, clearly the power that they bring and our ability to is going to increase. And so there's a positive, that's part of the uplifting message here, is that technology is part of this solution because it's
Totally.
allowing us to do, ironically,
Totally.
allowing us to do more human things.
Yes, yes, and I absolutely don't want anyone to think that I'm suggesting we go backwards. Partly we can't, and partly that would has it's no. I think where I'm coming from, E.O. Wilson, who was a genius, late E.O. Wilson, said we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and the technology of gods, and this is not doing us much favors. And it's the Paleolithic emotions, the medieval institutions, that are feeding into the ways that we use our godlike technology in enormously destructive ways. People are afraid of what happens if AI gains sentience, and then we can't control it, and it will go on the rampage around the earth in the ever repeating paperclip model. Is that a familiar model to you and your?
Well, why don't you just summarize? I
Okay,
think
so,
I
so
know.
it's a hypothesis that was put forward about a decade ago, which is what happens if you tell the AI to just make as many paper clips as it can, and you don't give it an off switch, and in the end, it destroys the entire Earth, and it's killing all the people because you have iron molecules in your hemoglobin that it needs to make the paper clips with. So the model is, and if anyone's interested, there was a podcast about a year ago with Eliezer Yudkowsky on the Bankless podcast, which was very interesting. This is a brief aside. Bankless is a cryptocurrency podcast of very charming young men in the States wanting to make the maximum amount of money with crypto. And, oh no, maximum amount of money, full stop. And they invite Eliezer Yudkowsky as being the person that they believe knows most about AI. And they go, okay, Eliezer, how do we make huge amounts of money with crypto? And he goes, with AI in crypto. And he goes, you can't, it's going to kill us all. And the rest of the hour of that podcast is these charming young men going into meltdown in real time with someone who has a brain the size of several planets explaining to them how the AI is going to go rogue. And they're going, but why does it hate me? He's going, it doesn't hate you. It doesn't care about you. You just got atoms it could use for something else. And they're going, but we could give it values. And he's going, well, whose values? And how are you going to do that? Because currently we can't even teach it how to stop a strawberry from going bad. And by the end of it, they're just complete melting down. And the thing that interested me most was they went, well, somebody who's as bright as you must not believe this. Can you give us some names? And he reels off half a dozen names. The next podcast, they get in one of these half dozen names and go explain to us why Eliezer is wrong. And I listened to that podcast, and basically the guy's explanation for why this could not happen was, I don't want it to happen. Which wasn't a fun experience, actually, because if you're super bright and that's the best you can come up with, that's not good enough, frankly. So anyway, everyone is afraid of the AI going rogue and destroying human civilization, such as it is, in pursuit of infinite growth. And we already have a system that is destroying the entire biosphere in pursuit of infinite growth, and it's called capitalism. So, and that is moved by the Paleolithic emotions and the medieval institutions. And if we weaponize the AI, whether it goes rogue or not, in service of infinite growth, then we will destroy ourselves. So what I am hoping we can achieve is a change in the value system, because the AI and every other tech that we can produce is absolutely expletive, deletive, amazing, but not when it's in service to destruction. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant.
No.
I didn't
This
mean
is.
to
I
rant.
love it. It's passionate. It's passionate. It's fascinating, and I think it really. Yeah, having read the book and hearing the way you talk about it, all of these things come through very, very strongly. And of course, the challenge that we have is that there are vested interests. It clearly comes out in the book and the way you talk, is there are vested interests who are out there trying to prevent that. And I think one of the things that you clearly bring out is that we have the capability to do this, do a lot of the things you're talking about with, actually, if there weren't human beings in the way, relatively little effort. But the trouble is, the biggest obstacle we have is, I don't say ourselves, because I don't think you and I are the biggest obstacles in the path of these things. Although I recognise I probably do play a part in that. With
Well, but we all do. We're all within the system. We are all colluding with the system.
and
We have to acknowledge that. But yes,
yeah, and so that very much comes through. And I think you present the potential for, I got to be careful, the potential for an optimistic future in that. But those vested interests, I mean, that's the biggest challenge here. When I look at lots of things that are going wrong, and whether we look at the UK at the post office scandal as one example, or I was about to say sewage companies, water companies, but of course, we might as
they
well,
are
they
sewage
are
companies. Yes,
pumping let's shit into the water. All of those
yes.
things, all of that driven by human,
Profit
yeah.
motive.
And I don't think it's that we're sitting there with a bunch of people who were born evil. I think it's,
No,
to your
no,
point,
you're
it's
right.
the
Exactly.
circumstances that have created that. So on the one hand, there's hope there because, well, they're not evil. They're not naturally evil. On the other hand, there are vested interest in maintaining said, and not asking those awkward and difficult questions that you're prompting us to ask.
Yeah. So we need more of us to ask the difficult questions because you're exactly right. The people in the heart of the death cult don't think of themselves as the bad guys. They're doing what the system asks of them and they're doing it really, really well. It's the overall system that's wrong. I'm reading a book at the moment called Wealth Supremacy by Marjorie Kelly, which is fascinating. And she's pointed out that if you took every single one of the CEOs and hedge funders around the planet and put them on a rocket to Mars, the system would continue exactly as it is. It's the system that we need to dismantle. And the only way we can do it is by everybody making different decisions. And that gets back to we need a different value system underneath everything that we do, which is one of the reasons I get also quite cross with people who, okay, geoengineering, we're going to seed the clouds with sulfur and that'll fix everything, or electric vehicles are going to fix everything, or stopping industrial agriculture will fix everything. I think stopping industrial agriculture is essential. But I spoke to somebody the other day who said, if you solve for food, you've solved everything. I think, no, I would love to solve for food, but you need to solve for the value system first. Or the rest, you're just playing whack-a-mole with a highly complex system, tweaking parameters at the edges, and that's not going to work.
I was thinking back to your comments about writing about the past, and I guess being that presents certain constraints about one thinks about because you're describing a world that existed, whereas
Yeah.
what you're talking about here is about a world that you want to have existed, and so you've got a lot more freedom. Is that harder work to write about that? Or is it actually easier because you can let your imagination run riot a little
No,
bit?
no, 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 no. It would be easier if I were writing a utopia where we have some kind of jump cut and
Right.
miraculously everybody thinks like I do and we're implementing everything. That would be relatively straightforward. I think it would still be a bit hard, but it would be relatively straightforward. What's mind-bendingly hard is this what we're calling a through-topia, which leads us through from exactly where we are to the potential for the future that we would be proud to leave to the generations that come after us. It's the route through. It's because exactly as you said, the vested interest is going to play dirty and power has power and the system is designed to keep the system going regardless of the impact on people and planet. And it will do that. And I absolutely 100% believe that whatever we do has to be peaceful. Power over violence is an integral part of the trauma culture and the old paradigm. And every single revolution that has employed violence has maintained the system. It just changes the franchise a bit. And we can't do that. It's too late for that. So it's a bad idea anyway. So how do we peacefully evolve our system in a way that isn't making assumptions of where people start? I want the maximum number of people to read this book and go, yeah, this is the world I live in. Here now today. It was set in 2023, but this was the world I lived in 2023. This is recognizable and I can see the route forward because the only way we're going to get enough people going, yep, that's a future I want, is if you can see not only where you want to get to or an idea of what the future might, there's light at the end of the tunnel, but also the pathway through the tunnel. And that's the hard bit. How do we get to something? And how do I explain? I've just talked about Audrey Tang and AI and Minecraft kids. How do I take those quite complex systems that you are now familiar with and in a fictional world, open those doors for people in ways that doesn't feel like you're reading a Dick Francis novel? And Dick Francis novels are fine, but there's basically that, here's the research I did for this novel, download. And now you know all about, I don't know, fitting corks into bottles, whatever it is. That's not the kind of novel I want to write. I want it to be, you can't stop turning the pages because the people you care about are doing things that you need to know what they're doing. And your concept of possibility, of what is possible within the world, is evolving at the same time. And that's quite an interesting knife edge to walk. And I don't know if I succeeded. Did I
I
succeed?
think so. Yeah, I think.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, it's fascinating hearing you talk about how you would about because on the one hand, so you've had this what I would term sort of flash of inspiration as to how you want to write it, but clearly, as you look at this through Topia and you're trying to describe things, there are lots of subject areas. And you talked a little bit about the podcasts you're listening to, and I imagine, and judging by the way you talk, that you have quite an eclectic sort of sources of information. Lots of different news sources and people feeding your thinking. Very what in simple terms, open-minded to interesting ideas, recognizing the scale of the problem that you want to describe. So I wonder, is that part of the challenge here? Were you doing a lot of research as you were writing it, or were a lot
God,
of these
yes.
bringing ideas? So I mean, this is quite, unlike researching a historical period where there's a definitive amount of evidence and stuff that there's always more, but there's stuff you can go through.
Yeah,
This is
exactly.
open ended, right? So you've got to be
Totally.
thinking about ethical issues and technological issues and environmental issues and all of these topics that play into the theme that's there. So this is quite an overwhelming menu of things that you've got to be on top of to really to get your narrative sorted, I suppose.
Yes. Yes, although and if I put it to myself like that, I would probably run screaming for the hills. But fortunately, I want to know this stuff because I want to curate the podcast. I want people to come and talk to me. I want the widest range. I want people from indigenous elders to people using cryptocurrency for regenerative finance to people who are changing the food system, whatever, transport, power, economics, all of these I want to know about anyway. So you're right. I listened to a really broad range of stuff. One of my ex-agent, what was he said? He said a scattergun polymath or something like that. It's just well, I thought, are you trying to be nice? I
Oh
don't
yeah, is
doesn't
that
sound that
compliment?
nice. So I think he wanted me to narrow down it. So I would keep going to, I could write about this, and he'd go, no. You started writing this kind of book. You need to keep writing that kind of book. But why? Why? I want to write something different. So and now I do. And now, yeah, I'm about to start the sequel. This week, I hope to write the sequel to the book that you have in your hand and keep feeding in the ideas. Because I can listen to all these podcasts or read these books or whatever, but most people aren't. But people do consume fiction. And if, please, somebody out there wants to turn this into television, then that's another tranche of people who might be interested. So and if other people want to write simpler fiction, it's. I think there is a common value system. I think we will not get through the bottleneck that is coming unless we really connect to the web of life and see ourselves as an integral part of the wider web. Beyond, and there are certain inherent values that lie within that. As long as everything is predicated on that, I think there's a million ways we could get forward. Nobody sat down and went, "There's only one route to capitalism." They just went, okay, the value is take as much as you possibly can and don't care about anything else in the route to getting rich. And if you do that, you're a genius. And then, all around the world are very many different ways of people screwing everything that they possibly can to get rich. So if we change the value system and people take it up, then there's going to be an infinite number of ways of doing it. It's not going to be just the ideas that I have.
I like the fact that you're setting out not to lecture people, because I think there is there are lots of campaigners, and you may not see yourself as a campaigner, but sort of people that want change who do it in a sort of you're with us or you're against us. So very cult like behaviors. And I sense in the way that you talk, but also in the way that you write, that you recognize there's a need to bring everybody with us, right? This isn't a sort of those awful people, and if you and it's the classic activists thing about you're either with us or you're against us logic.
Yes.
And I like the
No.
fact, and I think it's interesting to hear somebody thinking in the way that you do, because I'm struck very much, and I'm not comparing the two things. And I don't think you ever want me to compare the two things. The sort of Nelson Mandela approach, right? Of the only way this is going to work
Yeah,
is if we recognize the perspective of the other side and the position, and therefore we
sure.
do this together. And
Yeah.
that struck me as being a very strong thread in what you're saying.
Yeah, totally. Because there are 8 billion people on the planet, and we're only going to get to a future that everybody's children's children are going to be flourishing if we all do it together. Totally. And I think this is possibly where the shamanic perspective comes in. But when I look down the ancestral lines, my ancestors go back till we were hydrogen molecules, boiling in the sun. And the chances of okay, so hydrogen molecules don't have too much to survive, but by the time you got to life, there have been 5 mass extinctions. We are now in the middle of the 6th. My ancestors and your ancestors are the ones who survived those mass extinctions. And then every single one that was a sentient mammalian form survived long enough to reproduce. The odds against you and I being here are huge,
Right.
astronomical. And here we are. And each of us has something that we are bringing to the table. We are integral nodes in the web of life, even if we don't necessarily acknowledge that. And every single human being is bringing something of value. And in the world that I see that we could get to, those values are appreciated, identified. The space is there. We don't have bullshit jobs where you're just, being the hamster on the wheel because you've got bills to pay. You're doing something that you love, and you love it because you're good at it and you're valued for it. This is up to a point. You said we didn't want to go back, and I definitely don't want to go back, but I do want to re-embrace that sense of, I believe we are born believing that we're going to come into a mesh of support where we're surrounded by people who value us and care for us and love us, and whose job it is to help us find the best of ourselves and then bring that to the table for the benefit of everybody else. That's what 300,000 years of human evolution has done. That's how you and I got here, is because people who did that survived to produce the next generation. It's only in the UK, in the West, since the Romans arrived, it's only 2,000 years, which in 300,000 years of generation is a tiny amount of time, that we have separated off from the web of life, separated off from each other, and run into this bizarre sense where it's a zero-sum game of, if I get rich, you get poor, and I don't care if you get poor. And that much we need, I believe, to take differently. But what we have now that's different to our Boudican ancestors is the technology that allows you and I to make a connection across spans that, probably I could walk to wherever you are. I don't know where you live, but I have connections across the web to places I could never get to otherwise. I could if I choose to fly, but I don't. But, now we can make our communities not just a place, but a passion and a purpose. And that's going to allow extraordinary amounts of creativity, because what sparks creativity is human connection. So I can't even remember what your original question was.
That was
Sorry,
great.
Christian.
No, I was
Okay.
thoroughly enjoying that. That was because I think it's what you're presenting is a very uplifting message, and although the challenge is massive, I think that's why I love the fact that you're embracing technology. I think is a good illustration of recognizing one, where we're at, but two, that we're going to need some tools to help us do this. Right? You're not unrealistic enough about the scale of the challenge. So there's lots of people that come out and then say, well, if we could just scrap these things.
Mm,
If we look at oil, for example, we can't just give up on oil from one day to the next. We need a transition plan, because
yep,
otherwise chaos breaks out. And
totally.
so
And a lot of people die,
right.
and that's not where we want to go.
And
Yep.
I think one of the arguments that's often used by people who genuinely are scared by the idea of change, but also the vested interest, is that it'll be too difficult to do stuff. And so what you're painting towards is that, back to that point around bridging the gap, is you're recognizing ain't going to be easy, but we have the wherewithal to do it, and that wherewithal is both a human wherewithal and the willingness to do it, and the talents to do it, but also we need the support, as you say, of the technologies that we're using, like the one we're using at the moment.
Yep. Absolutely. Yes. So yes to all of this. It's not going to, no one is pretending that this is easy or that it's simple, but it is possible. And I think the history of humanity, climbing Everest is not easy, but people do it because it's what inspires them. If we can find that sense of looking forward to a future that we want, I don't think the fact that it's not easy is going to be a problem. It's the wanting it. It's the building the stories. We are a storied species. Every single thing we do is based on the stories we tell ourselves and each other about ourselves and each other. Everything from buying a new house to getting a new job to having kids, changing partners. Whatever we do, it's because we've told ourselves a story that, however hard it is at the time, down the line, it's going to be better. And it isn't always going to be better for us. It's down the line, it's going to be better for my kids. The people who are getting on boats and going across oceans with their family are not doing it because it's a fun thing to do, or even that they expect it to be fun for them when they land, but they do think their children's children are going to have a better life. And whether that is true or not, the story that they're telling themselves is that it's worth the hell that they're going through. So It's going to be hard. There's no reason to look around that. But the blueprint is there. We have the creativity to do this. And if we can get our values together and go, you know what, we want our grandchildren's grandchildren to have a decent life. We want there to be a flourishing planet. And we want to bring the best of human endeavors to this, then we can still do it. What I would say really clearly is that the existing system is not oriented to that. We need a new system. And so the question that arises is, how fast can we do that? Because it is genuinely urgent. At the time of recording, it was yesterday, they released the news that the Arctic temperature rose 38 degrees. None of us, 20 years ago, nobody thought that was going to happen. Everything is happening faster than we thought. So, this is Bayo Akomolafe. The times are urgent. Let's slow down. The times are really urgent. Let's get together and work out what we all really value, all of us. It does not matter where we are on the spectrum of current tribalism. Nobody cares who was on which side in the Romans green versus blue. They don't. It mattered a huge amount, and people would kill each other in Rome 2,000 years ago. And now nobody cares. But what the Romans left was a legacy. So we need to let go of our tribalism. And I understand that it touches people really, really deeply, but this is our Paleolithic emotions. We need to grow beyond our Paleolithic emotions and not let tribal stuff trigger us into spinning our wheels and using all our creativity and screaming at each other over things that are utterly irrelevant. Like, all come together. It can still be done.
I love that. What a positive note. And what I was going to say to you is, it seems to me there's a lot of, and I use it like pissing around going on, of sort of, just time and effort wasted on pointless things. And so
Yes.
your writing and your campaigning and your passion, your podcast, all the things that you do really point towards that call. I mean, it is a call to arms, not in the
Totally.
sense of weaponry, but in the
No, it's a
sense
call
of,
to action. Yes, it's a definite call to action. And it's a blueprint. If we did this, there is still time before the next election, whenever it is. If we did what happened there, we could create a different world. There is time.
I think that is a perfect note. I just want to pick up one final thing before I let you go, which is, you've kindly in the back, and I alluded to this earlier, but you've kindly in the back, you've provided some notes to the reader about your thoughts. And I thought that was incredibly helpful, but also quite unusual. And I wanted to just unpick why you thought that was a good idea. I think it is, by the way, to be clear, but I just wanted to.
I've always done it, to be honest. All the historical books, I think right from the beginning, or at least, no, not my first 4 contemporary crime novels, but from the Boudica books onwards, it seemed that if you've read this, you're going to want to know which bits did I just make up and which bits are anchored in current thinking. So here's a bibliography and here's my ideas. The Rome books, I think I discovered the historical basis for Christ, which, was quite an exciting day in a writing life. And so, this is what I think, and here are the current references, and you can go and explore more deeply. And what I've done with Any Human Power, there's a particular tweet around which the whole of the thriller narrative revolves, and that was an actual tweet that was taken down within half an hour. But I wanted that to be clear because I wanted to honor the person who had posted that. Really, that felt really important. But also then the fact that I'm saying all of this stuff, River Simple does have a future guardian model of governance, which if every company took it up tomorrow would change the world tomorrow. The technology is here. We can do quadratic voting on the blockchain. That is a thing. There are people I know who are doing this. And so it felt really important to offer that. And I am in the process just now, it's taking a while, to put together a resources page that will be on the website by the time the book comes out, so that people, and I'll update that because as soon as the book goes into print, my resources page is out of date. We're in the singularity of technology and of technological thinking and of distributed democracy thinking and economic thinking, all these things. We are now in the singularity being that point on a hyperbolic curve where it goes vertical along the x-axis. So I wanted people who are interested to have access to the things that will help them to build the world that works for them in their area or with their communities of passion and purpose.
Love it. I
Thank
should
you.
I should obviously tell people what the book is called in case they haven't picked up. It's Any Human Power. Just tell us where that came from.
That is from Ursula Le Guin, a speech. 2014 was obviously a very fertile year. So it was a speech she gave in 2014. And she said, and I'm paraphrasing, but we live in capitalism. Its power seems unassailable, but then so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can, by human agency, be overturned. And often the impetus to that overturning comes from the craft of writing. And that is exactly the premise on which we are basing this. I would say there's another quote from Amitav Ghosh, who wrote in The Great Derangement that future generations looking back at the Great Derangement, which is obviously now, are going to blame politicians and bureaucrats, which is completely fine. They should blame politicians and bureaucrats, but more, they should blame the artists and the writers, because it's not the job of politicians and bureaucrats to imagine different futures. It's our job. And not enough of us are doing it. And so those two together, I found them both after I started writing, but they both fed into, why did I write history for so long? Why did it take me so long to work out that we needed to be writing the way forward, not showing people the iniquities of the past?
Fantastic. I would ask you where people can get hold of it, but I think that's pretty obvious. It will be available in all good bookstores and probably
Yes.
some not so good ones as well. But let's
Yeah.
send people off to the really good bookstores.
Yes,
So
please.
just go support your local bookstore and get
Please
hold of a
do.
copy of this. It's
Yes, the giant vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity does not need more of your support. Although, if you felt like putting a review on the tentacles of the giant vampire squid, that would be really nice. Always, for every book that you read that you like. It's distressing how much bookshops and publishers take note of how many 5-star reviews there are on the giant vampire squid. So please, please support your local bookshop, but also then do go and put the reviews up, because it does make a material difference to how many books get out there in the world.
which, of course, is part of the challenge that you're talking about in your writing.
Yes.
We could keep talking forever. Thank you so. I mean,
Thank you.
for a conversation with a fiction author, so many things there. I will, as many as I can get my hands on, things that you've talked about in the show, I will put links to in the show notes. If there's anything else you want to provide, you can send that over to me. But thank you so much for writing an absolutely fascinating, engaging book. But more importantly, right now, thank you for being a wonderful guest on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure and an honor and a delight. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you. So that's it for this episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Manda for appearing and to you for listening. To find out more about Manda, her new book, Any Human Power, her podcast, Accidental Gods, and the other topics that we talked about on the show, have a look in the show notes. There are links to all of those there. If this is your first time listening to the show, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. I'll be back very soon with another episode of this show. But in the meantime, stay safe and thank you so much for listening.